Good morning everybody, and this video goes with lesson 6 from the London folder on Microsoft Teams, and it is looking at economic opportunities in London, and we are particularly looking at the London Docklands. So the growth of that area of Docklands, its decline and the reasons for those declines, and the regeneration, so what the area is being used for now. Now we have 3 little pieces of vocabulary to just look at before we go any further. Our first word is a pretty basic geography word, economic. So economic means anything to do with money and how it is being made. Our second word is derelict. So derelict is an area in a town or a city which has got sort of abandoned, broken down buildings, maybe old warehouses, old factories, an abandoned area of housing. Sometimes it might be referred to as an urban wasteland because it's in an urban area, it's in a town or a city, and it's land that's not being used for anything, so it's going to waste. And finally, this word regeneration. So when an area is regenerated, money is put into that area in order to try to attract new jobs, improve the living space and improve the environment, so more people are likely to go and live there in the future. So this area that we're looking at today, London Docklands, is located in London by the River Thames on this bend of the River Thames here, which is made very famous by the TV programme EastEnders. Now the area is referred to as the Isle of Dogs, and it's where we get Canary Wharf today. It's where the London Docklands are located. It's not a million miles away from Shoreditch, which is the area we looked at last lesson when we were looking at sort of cultural and economic and social opportunities in London. So Shoreditch is sort of located here. Okay, so it spreads over several different parts of London, several different boroughs. So you've got Southwark, Tower Hamlets, Lewisham, Newham and Greenwich. And at the times when they were operational as a port, when boats were coming in, it was at that time the world's largest port. So it's got a big history of different sort of economic activities and different ways that money was being created. Now, this brings us on to your first activity, which is on the next slide. And that activity is to do a bit of a timeline of the London Docklands from the 1800s through to 1981. Now, if you are using a laptop or a desktop and you're using Microsoft Teams, then there is a worksheet that's got lots of information on it about London Docklands over the different times. So you can use that worksheet to help you out. If you don't, I've separated that worksheet onto the next 3 slides. So we'll just quickly have a look at that now. Now you don't need to go crazy with this timeline, okay? We don't need loads of detail. It's just nice though to have a little bit of background and to think about how it has changed, and also to just have a look at some of these photos. I mean, this one is particularly crazy, this elephant being transported. It just gives you a bit of an idea about how London Docklands has changed over time. And for those of you that aren't really aware of it too much, this tall building here with the point, this is the main building of Canary Wharf, and this is the dome, okay, the Millennium Dome, built for New Year's Eve 2000 when we changed millennium, and is now used as an exhibition centre. Okay, so let's have a look at this worksheet. The first part of it looks at the beginning of the Docklands, so sort of 1800 to 1856, so a time when the British Empire was rapidly expanding and bigger Docklands were needed. It was chaos in the city, lots of people moving there, lots of boats coming in, and the Docklands that were there weren't big enough, so new ones were built, new big deep docks on this sort of bend area here. Going on to the next little section, we've got sort of 1880 through to 1920, and this is where Docklands were massively expanding, and we began to get sort of passenger ships coming in as well, food and goods from all over the world coming into London to be redistributed around the empire. And then moving on, finally, we've got the time during World War II, where obviously Docklands was a huge target during the Blitz for bombing and suffered a huge amount of damage. My dad grew up in London, not too far from the Docklands, as a child, and he had lots of stories about the bombing and the state that the Docklands were left in afterwards and the absolute sort of devastation. And then finally, through from the 1960s to 1981, which is the time of decline and then the eventual closure of the docklands. And you do need to understand why it is the docklands were closed. London docks are quite unusual in that they're quite far inland. Now, the reason that this was able to be done, so that the docks were right in the sort of the city area of London, is the River Thames is tidal. So what that means is that when the tide comes in, water gets pushed up the River Thames, and that meant that the river was deep enough for these boats to come in. However, around the time of the sort of 1960s, 1970s, the boats were getting bigger and bigger, and we had a process known as containerisation. So if you picture yourself, in your mind, a big ship today that's transporting goods, they have massive metal containers, large, the container ships, to be able to navigate themselves along the River Thames to the docklands. The docklands just weren't deep enough, okay? Ships that could get down didn't need as many workers because the containers were lifted on and off by cranes. So you've got that whole idea of mechanisation as well. So instead of 100, 200 men being used to unpack the boats as they came in, instead maybe you only needed 3 or 4 cranes, and each crane only needed a few people to operate it. So you've got fewer people being employed. And finally, just the general decline of industry and manufacturing in the UK as that manufacturing and industry work began to move to Asian countries where there were bigger workforces and cheaper workforces. So those 3 things together, so the containerisation and the very large ships not being able to make it down the River Thames, the use of cranes in order to get any goods off ships, and the general decline of manufacturing, that caused the docklands to be completely closed by 1981. And obviously all the people that then lived and worked in those areas lost their jobs. So over this time of decline in the 1960s to the 1980s, Docklands was having a really tough time. Obviously the population declined because there was no work anymore. So lots of housing areas were left abandoned and were boarded up. There wasn't just the loss of jobs from the decline of the Docklands, but any associated industries as well. So, making parts for ships and making parts for cranes, all those jobs went as well. And so did jobs that didn't have anything to do with it. So, bars, restaurants, hairdressers, other shops, everything began to close down, because if you've lost your job, the last thing you're going to do is go and get your hair done or go out for dinner on Friday night. So you get decline of all the different industries in the area. Now Docklands also had other things that made it a difficult area to regenerate and to get people to go there and for get other jobs to go there. There was very, very poor, narrow roads in the area, a real lack of public transport. There was only one bus route into the Docklands area, and there was no rail or underground service at all. Most of the housing was rented and was quite poor quality housing as well. So very high density, so the houses were really tightly packed together. Terrace houses, large estates with big high-rise blocks. So there was a real lack of open space, a real lack of recreation facilities, and as I said, very little shopping facilities. And the shopping facilities that there were closing down because nobody in the area had any jobs, nowhere in the area had any money. So a really tough time, and we call this time period a cycle of decline. It's kind of like a knock-on effect. If the biggest employer in an area suddenly no longer exists, then the consequences of that are going to be felt in other industries and in other areas as well. And you begin to see things like educational rates go down because the children that live in the area can see that there's no jobs to go to. Therefore, what's the point of trying at school? Crime rates will go up as people become desperate as they don't have work. Okay, so, and then that means that people don't want to move into the area anyway. So more and more people start to leave. The housing stock becomes more and more empty and derelict. That leads to vandalism. So, you can see how an area can get into one of these cycles of decline and just get worse and worse and worse. So, your next activity, what I would like you to do for me, is get these questions written down into your book or your piece of paper, and make sure you leave 4 or 5 lines between each one, because what you're going to be doing is just watching a little series of videos and having a go at answering these questions. Okay, so if we just look at the next slide. Okay, these here are the videos that you're going to be watching. The first two talk about something called the London Docklands Development Corporation. Now, the London Dockland Development Corporation, or the LDDC for short, was a government-run enterprise that started in the 80s and went over into the sort of 90s. It was lasted for 17 years, and the job of the LDDC was to redevelop the Docklands area. What you need to understand was, with the decline of Docklands, you had this huge area of wasteland in the middle of one of the major cities of the world with nothing going on, with no money being made. And that was an incredible opportunity for development. So the LDDC was in charge of that development. Now, these two videos are a little bit old. You know, you can watch it and enjoy the fashions and the perms of the time. They do get a little bit dry at times, but do watch them, okay? This next video is from the 1960s, and it's just somebody sort of driving through Docklands recording from their car. There's no sound, there's no voiceover, but I think it's quite interesting. It only lasts a few minutes, and you can really begin to see the decline of the area, and you can really begin to see what was happening, and also get a really good idea of what the area was like in the 1960s, because it's so completely different now that it's incredible. And then the final video does show you what London Docklands is like today. And if you compare what you see in the third and the fourth video, I do think you will see that, you know, it is completely different in every way. Okay, so if you have got Microsoft Teams, those questions that I've just been through on the previous slide are on a worksheet. But if you haven't got Microsoft Teams, you can use the questions, and I will put these video YouTube links in the description at the bottom of this video, so you can pause the video now and you can watch these 4 little video clips, please, and then have a go at answering the questions. Okay, so now that you've watched the video and you have answered the questions, or you've filled in the note-taking sheet, you should be able to see that the type of work that is available in the Docklands area has completely changed, and that the Docklands area itself is absolutely unrecognisable. When I used to live in London, I lived in Hackney, and my first teaching job was in Greenwich, which is just to the south of that bend in the river. So I used to cycle through London Docklands on my way to work in Greenwich, and it is absolutely incredible. When it was built, you know, nothing like Docklands had really been seen in a British city. It almost felt like you were in New York or something like that. These big gleaming buildings and all the glass and all the metal and the bridges and the swanky bars. So completely different way of living and a completely different way of making money. So as you know from previous lessons, the traditional financial centre of London is that area right in the middle known as the City of London. But Canary Wharf is a competitor to that. It is the second financial area of London. And not only has it got a massive sort of financial sector, there's also a lot of media companies and film, music, that sort of thing. There's lots of sort of journalism and writing companies and publishing companies. There obviously is a huge amount of sort of retail and also entertainment in the shape of all the bars and all the restaurants. And if you sort of watch that 4th video, the guy who's narrating it talks about how lots of the shops and the bars, they reflect the very, very high salaries that a lot of those people living in that area are on. So a lot of those old buildings from the Docklands time have been completely regenerated, and they are now very, very nice offices or very beautiful apartments. You've got those big tall buildings, you know, with big apartments on the top that cost millions. Okay, so it's a very, very different area. So a very successful area. So from one point of view, the regeneration of London Docklands has been incredibly successful. We have got many, many different kinds of jobs. We have got people making a lot of money. Even the recession of 2007 didn't stop that huge growth of Canary Wharf and that huge growth of the financial sector. However, as always, there is a downside because it didn't prevent the decline of the manufacturing sector. So if you have a look at this graph, this is from the White textbook, okay? It is on those pages as well that I've scanned in to put into Microsoft Teams, but it shows you the different types of jobs. So if you look at the key, that's 1996, okay, the orange, and 2013 is the green, and it's the jobs in London in 1996 and 2013. Okay, so you can see how they have changed. So primary, so working on the land, is low in both, but look at manufacturing. There has been a huge decline, okay? And if we look at this one here with the biggest increase, we've got professional, scientific, technical and real estate. So real estate is the selling of housing and land. And we can see that that is a massive increase. Health and social care work, education work, administrative support and services, so people working in offices. These have all got huge increases. Now, the redevelopment of docklands is all very well if you can do these jobs. Okay, if you are well educated, if you've got those social skills and those personable skills. But one of the biggest criticisms of docklands redevelopment, as so often is the case with redevelopment, is it didn't do anything for those dock workers that had lost their jobs. So somebody that's worked in London docklands for 30 years can't suddenly turn around and get a job in finance and insurance or go and be a waiter in a fancy restaurant. It's just not the kind of skill set that those people have got. Another criticism of it was that there was basically no social housing built. For those people that were on a budget and were finding it hard to find work, there was nowhere for them left to live in docklands. All those slum areas, all those terraces just got knocked down and cleared away. So there was nowhere left for these people to live in that area, so they had to move out. And also, if you are on a lower paid job in Canary Wharf, say you're somebody that goes in of an evening and you clean the offices, there's nowhere really in Canary Wharf that you can afford to live. So you're left with living outside of the area and having to travel into work. So we have got opportunities been developed by the regeneration of Canary Wharf, but they're not opportunities for everybody. And that is the important thing for you to understand. So when you are writing an answer about this and about the opportunity provided by London Docklands, that's what you need to be saying, is that yes, there are opportunities and those opportunities are fantastic and people can make a lot of money and they can live in a fantastic area, and there are very good schools there now that produce some of the best results in the country. However, those opportunities are not open for everybody, because if you are not well educated and you can't get a well-paying job, then there really isn't very much social housing for you. And if you are one of those original dock workers, well, there's definitely nothing for you there. There are no real jobs that you can go and do. Okay, so that about wraps up the case study. What I'm going to do for the next lesson, or the next video, is a couple of sample answers of how you could answer various 9 markers looking at these opportunities in London that we have looked at over the last couple of lessons, and who they are opportunities for and to what extent they provide a better life for the people living in the Docklands. As always, if there's anything you've not quite understood, then do make sure you contact your teacher and we will do our very best to help you. Okay, bye everybody.